Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. So I want to welcome you to this webinar delivered by IBM and Winchester Business Systems. This webinar is titled The Impact of Adaptive Clinical Trials on eClinical Systems. I guess the appropriate question is, if you were meant to be on a plane to Houston, you're in the wrong place. Today we'll talk about how to streamline the clinical trial management process through modern technology. We're going to accommodate the needs of adaptive clinical trials. This session should take about 35 to 45 minutes, and afterwards you should have a better understanding of this overall topic, and also of some of the special requirements of adaptive clinical trials. It's become self-evident that employing adaptive clinical trials can have a dramatic positive impact on a company's clinical development program. There are significant promises that emanate from this practice and the new technology of adaptive clinical trials. The promises can include shortened drug development cycles, improved safety profiles, and reductions in the cost of a clinical trial. That's not our primary goal, however. For adaptive trials to be truly successful, the clinical trial management system that your company uses to manage trials must be designed to accommodate the drive of this new technology. The objective of this one-hour webinar is to highlight how the CTMS also might adapt and work well together with your other eClinical systems that your company is using to support the needs of adaptive clinical trials. The key questions we hope to answer include: what are adaptive clinical trials? What are the benefits of adaptive clinical trials? How do adaptive clinical trials impact the design of the CTMS? In what way must eClinical systems work well together and interface? And what are the basic rules of eClinical systems to support adaptive trials? And we'll try to keep that as simple as we can and as short a list as we can. So for adaptive designs, it represents a new technology in the field of clinical research and development. It's more than another new statistical methodology, tool, formula in the hands of biostatisticians. It's a new technology that changes the entire clinical research process. Mid-study adaptations and flexibility are new concepts, not only for statisticians, but also for trial managers, data scientists, and regulatory experts. Adaptive designs challenge medical advisory groups, data monitoring committees, data safety boards, ethics committees, and regulatory agencies. Adaptive or flexible trial design refers to a conceptual clinical trial methodology that allows for modifications to take place after the trial started without compromising the scientific method. For all forms of adaptive design, the decision-making rules governing the adaptation must be clearly stated or described and justified in the study protocol. In adaptive design, setting sponsors may make modifications to the trial design in response to the data collected during the trial. Changes are based on the assumption as long as the response action and decision-making rules are predefined. Generally, the protocol will specify where, when, how these scientific study modification points can occur frequently in a fully sequential design or at other predetermined intervals. Adaptive trials, by design, have mid-study analysis and decision points that will change the way a study is conducted. As adaptive trial methodologies are relatively new to most pharmaceutical and biotech companies and their vendors, there is the potential that mid-study modifications to design could have a negative impact on the clinical trial if not properly executed. So what does success look like? Adaptive trials have a dramatic impact on a lot of components. The culmination of a successful adaptive trial requires significant coordination of people, information, and technology. In fact, my favorite is to call it the 3Ps of people, programs, and procedures. Implementation of traditional clinical trials allow for more waterfall and stepwise manners. An adaptive trial requires involvement from all disciplines all the time. And I thought adaptive trials were going to be easier, he says. Well, adaptive designs will also change many other components as well. The communication and teamwork required for adaptive trials are very different than the linear approach taken in traditional trials. In an adaptive trial, communication requires that team members are brought together earlier and more often throughout the trial. The members need to be involved at the mid-study points to analyze the impact of modifications to these areas of study conduct. Once analyzed and decisions made, the predetermined logistics required will be executed by the team members and or their automated systems like the ones we list here. Therefore, adaptive designs can change many and all aspects of a clinical trial. Clinical areas. What makes a clinical area conducive to an adaptive design? There's no benefit of stopping a trial early if a lot more subjects have been enrolled by the time we observe your outcome. There may be potential for surrogate endpoints, requiring early planning with full scenario development. Trial must have flexibility to accommodate mid-study changes. The periodic study analysis must have access to clean data. Dirty data anytime during the trial really slows down our ability to have a truly adaptive and functional clinical trial. And one of the things we may want to do is simulations and use simulation techniques that include new patient enrollment forecasts, patient behavior forecasts, visit schedules, patients required clinical materials, and supply chains requiring the clinical materials. And so if we use simulation to essentially run our protocol first and say, what are the different things we're going to have to do to make sure that we can adapt to the adaptive trial as the midpoints change, we predefine that with the simulations. Then we're ready. Then our protocol is really ready. So what's the impact of adaptive designs on electronic data capture, data management, IVRS, and CTMS? Early planning with full scenario development. Very early in the protocol design process, all possible statistical variations and research outcomes need to be discussed and planned. We don't reach a point at midpoint and say, oh, there's a surprise. Teams to be involved include clinicians, statisticians, project management, data management, drug supply management, and regulatory and quality assurance. All these teams and the systems the teams use need to have input on the developed scenarios and the impact on their disciplines. Without each team's early involvement, there is the chance that quality and logistic issues will arise that could lead to abandoning the adaptive trial, as we lose the whole point of this thing. So in the typical development process, where we look at a chart that's something like this, where we begin with protocol development, and then we recruit investigators and patients and collect data and do trial management and analysis reporting, then file for approval, the first step in applying specific technology solutions in clinical development can look something like this. To capture the clinical data, we use an EDC system. And so we'll wrap an EDC system over this process in the very early components. So electronic data capture is used here. So to capture the clinical data, we use EDC. Then we place that data into an electronic data management system. So in the back, there may be a clinical data management system where all the data is stored. So this is where we could do our analysis. So we store it here. We're able to do analysis from here. And you've probably now connected to your CTMS, a SAS-based system or some other business intelligence or statistical system to help you analyze and look for those mid-study points or early study points or milestones that you wish for, that you planned for. And so this is where the data is stored, and it becomes accessible to us for analysis. The next system contains all of our trial documents, our SOPs, our protocols, site essential and regulatory documents perhaps. They may be placed in the trial master file or in our document management system. So now that we've got these three systems running, and we may have more, IVRS, laboratory information systems, LIMS, and so on. We may have many other systems running, imaging systems, and so on, all hopefully connected. But what we need to operate all of this is we use a CTMS or a clinical trial management system. The CTMS is kind of like a horizontal system where the others were far more vertical. They had a very specific disciplines in mind, specific people were working with them. The teams are very, very vertical. Now the team is very horizontal in a clinical trial management system. The CTMS should contain the collection points, metrics, mid-trial measurement points to help highlight progress during our adaptive trial. So if in the setup of the protocol in the clinical trial management system, we predefined our milestones, we predefined what mid-study points we're looking for, then we also said what metrics do we need to collect from the various systems that are used during the clinical trial, and then store those metrics and present them with the clinical trial management system. The clinical trial management system gets to be our kind of our umbrella system to help us watch over the adaptive design. What it says to me is that the clinical trial management system, we can see the coincidence of these circles, must probably start, the input to it must probably start much earlier than all the rest of the systems, because this is where we would begin to plan our trial. We would simulate our trial here. We may use our EDC and our CDMS for simulation as well, but for sure we would use the clinical trial management system to help us with the simulation. So in other words, adaptive designs represent a totally new technology in the field of clinical research and development. Adaptive trials underscore the reasons that we need the eClinical systems in the first place. They are far-reaching consequences. There are far-reaching consequences that are often ignored or underestimated in the beginning. In fact, when it comes to adaptive design, there is ongoing debate about statistical optimality and practical feasibility and regulatory acceptance. So what are the major benefits? What are the major benefits of adaptive designs? Ethical benefits of adaptive designs are the ones that count the most. The new technology will provide enormous advantages to individuals who participate in clinical trials by reducing their exposure to ineffective or unsafe treatments. Society benefits because this new technology helps bring better drugs to market faster. We're coming to the point where we can say that if we adopt adaptive designs, it really gives us the great excuse to implement disciplines we may not have been successful at before. I mean, tightening up disciplines, SOPs, rules, and the like, we may not have been able to get across before. So in the major benefits, the bottom line is that adaptive designs will prevail because they provide primarily clear ethical benefits, and not just because they bear the potential for cost savings. It has been interesting to me that people have looked at cost savings as the principal reason for putting in adaptive designs, when the fact is so much more is gained, and cost savings is really a benefit from it. It's neat to be able to plan for it. It's neat to be able to put in a system that helps us reduce our costs, and that's fine. But imagine the overall efficiency and time gain that we get from an adaptive design. If, for instance, we know at a mid-study point that if we make this change, the whole trial will improve dramatically because of whatever this change at the midpoint may be. Perhaps it's adding or reducing cohorts, or reducing the number of patients that we needed, or adding another country to our investigator mix, or whatever it may be. Those changes can have large positive impacts that are beyond costs. And it's conceivable that adaptive designs will, in fact, facilitate us getting to market faster with drugs. But some common misconceptions. There are certain areas of confirmatory clinical research where adaptive designs are more applicable, and other areas where adaptive designs are less or not applicable. Adaptive trial designs are characterized by unmanageable complexity and less careful planning. These are the misconceptions. Flexibility to accommodate adaptive designs require smaller sample sizes than traditional designs. That's another misconception. Flexibility to accommodate mid-study changes, people, supplies, systems, and quality must be designed and built so that all components can quickly adapt to mid-study quick analysis and change. Early decisions must be enacted quickly for maximum benefit. The inability to efficiently adapt to study changes has delayed and reduced the effectiveness of many adaptive trials. So it's possible, and you'll get copies of the slides. It's possible this one slide really is the most helpful to us in our thinking about what's the impact of adaptive designs in our company. These misconceptions should be dealt with very early on. Now, eClinical systems must span a wide range of designs from clinical trial phase 1 to 4 and integration tools. In trial design, trial simulation, and the interactive analysis and adaptation. The availability of statistically sound, validated software that mimics the adaptive course of the trial while preserving the type 1 error rate is crucial, as adaptive designs are far more complex than traditional non-flexible designs. So a proper software package spans a wide range of designs from clinical trial phase 1 to 4 and integrates the tools for trial design, trial simulation, interactive analysis, and adaptation. With adaptive designs, the era of handmade statistics is over. With traditional designs, an experienced statistician was able to do most calculations like planned sample size, without a software package. By contrast, this is no longer feasible with adaptive designs. Also, the analysis previously done almost entirely with older statistical packages requires a new type of software that considers the various multiplicity issues and provides bias correction tools. So that brings us to the three basic rules. As trials become adaptive, their statistics become dynamic. Formerly, the p-values were calculated on static data at the end of the trial. An adaptive p-value considers the dynamic character of the data, namely when and how often the data have been unblinded, at what level of inference, based on what kinds of adaptations. Before you use adaptive trials, you should consider three basic rules. Use only validated software. What vendor doesn't say their system doesn't work properly? Use only designs that can be simulated and analyzed with your software. Use only designs that can be simulated and analyzed with your software. There is no reason not to pilot something first. There is no reason not to simulate something first. Simulate the trial first. If you're going to spend, well, let's suppose, millions on the trial, to spend a few dollars on the simulation seems like a worthwhile thing to do. And use only inferential statistics that were calculated with your software. Clinical technology providers, the technological hurdles cannot be overcome without the help of clinical technology providers that can facilitate access to trial data and provide the systems to manage adaptive trial data appropriately. These include, at least the two I've listed here, electronic systems that give real-time access to clinical data, that manage resources and allocate patients in a way that fulfills the requirements of adaptive designs, and software that generates accurate, valid statistical inference and steers the process of design, trial design, simulation, and adaptation. With an adaptive study, data is continuously evaluated to ensure decisions are made as quickly as possible to adjust dosages, treatment arms, potentially months or even weeks into a study. Data integration and reconciliation. This process of data integration and reconciliation becomes laboratory information management systems between LIMS, IVRS, CTMS, and EDC is one, as most data managers and trial managers can attest to. It is often non-trivial and vastly time-consuming for teams. So we need to, before the trial becomes active, make sure that our connections between the various systems that we drew circles on earlier are really well connected to the CTMS, such that the CTMS provides us the overall umbrella or reporting capability or analysis capability to know where we are all the time on the trial, where our enrollments are, what arms are active, what our screen failures look like, what everything is doing during the trial. And we need to be able to collect metrics that might not have presented themselves as great or even trial answers during our plan, but maybe even present some surprises to us. And one of my favorite things to do is look at things from an eClinical portal point of view. In other words, this wonderful thing called the cloud being at the center of things, that the luxury of time is eliminated in an adaptive trial. Every delay, not only prolongs time to decision-making, but it also adds additional opportunity costs, amplified by the inability to make changes that increase the chances for a successful outcome. This means all data should be continually integrated, including firing edit checks at real time across both interactive and batch-loaded data sources. A central system with combined clean CRF and auxiliary data becomes the authoritative source for adaptive analysis. So eClinical systems must meet these requirements. It is critical that EDC, CDMS, IVRS, CTMS talk to each other or interface. So combining the competitive advantage that adaptive studies can bring today with the likelihood of the future operational necessity makes a compelling argument. When evaluating EDC and CDMSs to include the ability to meet these new requirements. Much like the critical path phase 3 compound with a 50% chance of successfully getting to market. The assurance that an organization's study infrastructure is ready for the shift from retrospective to prospective decision-making can and should be better for than heads or tails. Now that pretty well concludes the presentation portion of this webinar.
Great.
I'd like to open this to questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. If you don't mind, I'll just remind everyone how to submit those questions once again. Now, to do so, please remember to use the chat function, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have those questions, please type those out and submit them to the Q&A group. Now, while you were speaking, Mike, we received a couple of questions. The first one being, do all of the eClinical systems have to be supplied by the same software vendor?
It's unlikely that anybody is an expert at everything. And so the answer to that, first off, is no. One would not expect that one company, maybe they would be, but it's unlikely, that one company is going to have the best of the best CTMS, the best EDC, the best CDMS, the best adverse event, the best LIMS, and so on, all from one place. So I guess the thing you must do when you make your selection is say, can whatever I'm selecting, because I like what I see for a, let's say, EDC or CDMS or CTMS, can it connect to the other systems, the other eClinical systems that I'm going to use? That's probably the critical question. So some easy pulse points or things to look at are, is it web-enabled? Can it talk across the web to the other systems? Can I enter something in EDC, like the fact that a patient has seen an investigator at visit 3 and they've filled out pages 8, 9, and 10? Can that event be passed to the CTMS so the CTMS knows what's going on?
Okay, great. Now we received another question, and I will explain it word for word. The presentation seemed to be focused on larger trials. How does this system work in small biotech? Should the acquisition of components be prioritized?
Well, I personally don't see a great deal of difference between the needs or what you would do in a small biotech as compared to a larger pharmaceutical company. So the way I think it works in a small biotech is the emphasis here has to be on the planning and simulation up front. In other words, you have to plan for the adaptive trials. It's true that I lectured a lot on infrastructure and get your systems in place and so on. But the fact is that even if you have the systems in place without a good plan, it really doesn't matter if your infrastructure is good if you don't have a good plan. So the plan part is probably the hard part. That is the hard part up front. So and there is no great set of standards for this, I think. And should you do it on phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 trials? I believe you should. I believe adaptive trials were first, in fact, most likely in phase 1 trials, and have now spread to the rest. Should the acquisition of components be prioritized? I don't know what's right. What has happened in the industry is EDC became a very popular area to automate early because the people who work with EDC systems, biostatisticians, are quite familiar with computers and technology, and were likely to see the big improvements that could be made by putting an EDC system in. So one might say that one order of implementation would be put in the system that's going to be a success up front, so all the rest of the infrastructure leans upon a success as opposed to a failure. So if you do put in EDC first and it is successful, the rest of the systems you implement will likely be successful as well. You likely cannot implement all of those systems I listed earlier at the same time and hope it's all going to work. It's probably going to take time, and I would bet the priority should be pick the one that you're going to be the most successful with. It might be your document management system where you put your SOPs.
Okay. Great, thank you. And we received another question after that one. Do CTMSs have the ability to gather and display metrics that are collected by other eClinical systems like EDC?
Well, to give you advice as a potential user of a CTMS, if your CTMS you're looking at does not have the ability to gather the metrics you need, you should not pick that CTMS to implement. The CTMS should have the ability to accept the metrics coming from EDC or CDMSs and so on, so that you do know, you look one place, and in that one place I can see not only what investigators I've recruited, but what patients I've recruited, what enrollments I've had, what the status of patients are at any given point in time. And the analysis that I would like to do is presented to me through the metrics offered up by the CTMS.
Great. Now another question, can a CTMS be used to simulate trials and or parts of trials?
Well, a CTMS certainly should be able to do that. If, for instance, you build your CTMS and put in your sample protocol or specification, let's suppose, into the CTMS where you call out where's it going to run, how is it going to run, and so on, and then you put your estimates in for timing and how often you're going to do monitoring and what your criteria for inclusion, exclusion are, and so on, you should be able to run a pilot and a pretend trial in a conference room against that specification and see what you get. And I would be tempted then to try out my infrastructure connections with EDC and CDMSs to make sure that if at the sample conference room investigator site that I'm collecting and I'm getting the metrics I want, so that once I turn this trial on in the CTMS, that I've actually got something to work with.
Okay, great. Now, along the same question of trials, does it take a lot more time up front to plan an adaptive trial?
Much more. It takes much more time to plan an adaptive trial. It's kind of one of those interesting things to say, though, is that, gee, I don't have the time to do the plan, but I do have the time to put out the fires. That's what you'd use in a management situation. In this case, from a trial point of view, to get the most out of adaptive trials, you need to plan, what those mid-study points are and what you will do based on expected values at the mid-study points. So, in other words, if you had 3 or 5 or something like that expected values and knew that you had 5 different routes that you must be able to take dependent upon that mid-study point.
Okay.
So it does take a lot more time because you need to think out, what's going to happen. It is, the difference is that if you reach that mid-study point and found that, X was true and yet you didn't plan this as an adaptive trial, your choice would be to go on and collect data in a trial you're not happy with, or to shut that trial down and start again. So the adaptive trial in that case would have been a far better solution, but it would have meant much more planning up front.
Okay. Another question just came in while you're speaking. Will adaptive trials be applicable for everyone?
Whoa. The literature I read leads me to believe it will be. It may take some time for adaptive trials to really be successful in medical device manufacturers. You would probably see it more in biotechs and pharmaceuticals. But it may be applicable to everyone. But it's obviously going to depend upon the compound that you're studying, the indications you're studying, and what your trials are all about. It's kind of, what's that, the standard answer? Well, it depends upon the trial. Well, it kind of does. It depends upon the trial whether it be acceptable to everybody. For instance, there are some companies that I talk to almost every day that say, we will never have EDC in our company. Not certain why they really feel that way, but they say that sort of thing. I'll never have EDC in our company. Yet, probably better than something like 84% of all companies doing clinical trials are using EDC somewhere. Maybe not on every trial, but on some trials. That's going to be true, I think, with adaptive trials as well. But there's a lot to understand. And like I said, there's a lot of infrastructure investment up front, maybe even in just people that plan the trial. There may be more investment there. And that's something people are going to have to buy into. So, yes, applicable, implemented by, maybe not.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we have no other questions at this time. I'd like to thank you, Michael, for an excellent presentation, but I'd also like to thank our guests for taking the time out of your day to learn more about the impact of adaptive trials on eClinical systems. Thanks once again, and enjoy the rest of your day.